Hey guys, BassMunk here. Just want to make this quick intro for you guys so you understand the whole premise of this second part to this repair. The whole point of me making this video was to go more in depth and to give you guys a detailed step-by-step guide as to what you need to do and how to do it. Because I know when I first started this, none of these details were mentioned anywhere on YouTube. And just one quick little mention I'll make here in the intro, just so it's quick and easy. When it comes to removing the fuse for the fuel pump, I just find it best to have the car already running, especially if it's warm. If the car is warm, you'll be surprised how long it'll last before it finally stalls. It's incredible. But then that's really for your benefit though. That way there's less of a chance of it spraying in your face when you go to remove the line. Because that did happen to me the very first time. It actually went right into my eyes. It was pretty brutal. So anyway, without further ado, with my best Ben Stein voice, here is part 2. Alright, let's get this party started then. First step. Like I showed you in part 1, third from the bottom, 15 amps, that's the fuel pump there. And like I said, get it started, pull that, let it stall. If it's warm, even better. And we'll walk around that beautiful car, and we'll head underneath in front of the rear wheel. So the big cylinder there, if you're a newbie, that is the fuel filter. If I can get a good shot of this, sorry. That big thing there. Okay. Once you have the engine off and it has sputtered to a halt, what you want to do is push on that white tab there. Now, some of the fittings here from the factory have white tabs, like that. But the ones for the fuel line specifically have black ones, so it's kind of hard to differentiate. But it will always be on the outside here. So you push there. It'll never be on the reverse side. So this is the bend here. Boom, boom, boom. It's always on the outside. This one is white because I replaced the fitting. Because the whole point in me replacing purpose of replacing this fuel line is because the original fitting did not want to come off the fuel filter. All I wanted to do is replace the fuel filter. It didn't want to come off. The other side came off perfectly, super easy. This side, the stock one, was not coming off. I actually resorted to, I was just getting so ticked off, I resorted to cutting that part of the fuel filter off just to see what the heck was going on in there. And I don't know what was happening. It just wasn't releasing. I just mangled it basically. And I was like, well, if this thing if I have to hack this thing, I might as well find out what's wrong with it. And but anyway, it just didn't want to come off. So I replaced it, went to Canadian Tire, got a new fitting. So what I did was, you keep the original one, don't throw it out if you ever have to do this. Go to Canadian Tire, get the one that's slightly smaller than the factory one, because it will be imperial size, not metric as usual, because for some reason we're still the States, or we get everything from the States. So don't get the one size up, because you won't be able to, it'll be too big for the new fuel line to fit over, so that's a bad idea. So get the one that's closer to the size of the original, that's slightly smaller, and then you just get a drill bit that you size to the inside diameter of the original one, which is why you keep the original, and then you just drill out this one that you bought. It's really not that big of a difference. It's a tiny amount that you're shaving off the inside, so strength is not an issue.
it works just fine. You're just boring it out slightly. It's a tiny little difference. And then you get the appropriate fuel flow. You don't have to worry about it kinking. When I first got this though, I did that, but then I didn't replace the original line. And this is what the whole reason why I had to go through this trouble, is because I had to cut off about an inch of the original line to get the fitting off. There was no other way. This stuff is kind of heat shrunk around the fitting. Well, maybe I'm wrong. If I had a heat gun, maybe I could have slipped it off. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is, since I had to cut a bit of the other line, the original line off, I tried to reconnect it to this new fitting that I bought. I did bore it out, but because I didn't make effective use of this extra slack here that you can see, right? The original one has a good inch of extra slack. It's pretty good. But I didn't make full use of that. I also didn't re-bend this. I didn't heat this up and try to bend it. So I didn't have a heat gun. I only had a hair dryer. It wouldn't go hot enough, of course, to effectively heat up the original line, which actually is engineered to be heated and worked with and still keep structural rigidity while being able to fit over lines like this and get that nice tight fit, you know. So when it connected right here, right at the end of the fitting, or I should just illustrate with this one, it kinked right there because I didn't have a nice easy bend. And just that tiny little kink, it really wasn't that bad, but that tiny little kink was enough to restrict fuel flow and make the engine run lean and give me a check engine light.
Some quick supplementary info about drilling out the fitting. So just get this thing started, get it into the tip a little bit, and then hit the trigger. So that was just a demonstration run. Once you get it started and it goes inside, it'll self-guide. It's actually quite nice. It just kind of keeps itself nice and straight. Once you feel it touch the end, once you feel it touch the back end here, make sure that you stop and pull back again. There we go. Once it goes back, touches this, yeah, stop, pull back. I am illustrating with the stock fitting. This is the stock one. As you can see, it was mangled. Hence why we had to do this and get that new fitting over there, because this is useless now. So this is the one that you'll actually get from the store. Once you do that, you will actually get a bit of debris in there, as you can see here, and you want to make sure you flush that out. If you do get any loose pieces, if you have any pieces in there that are hanging off, like stuff like this, right, and it hasn't completely detached, you want to clean that out too. So you use one of these. I have the file set here. This one's circular. Smooth out the inside. Try not to hit the end. Keep this relatively flat without gouging with the tip. That's quite easy to do. This is a pretty sharp tip, actually. And then when you're done rolling up a little piece of paper towel, shop towel, whatever, you can get in there to get rid of any loose stuff again, and then spray it out with some brake clean, just to flush everything out. And it evaporates, of course, if you've ever worked with it, so that's not an issue. And the important thing here is you want to keep as much debris out of this section of fuel line, because there is no way to filter it out. You have to remember that everything we're doing here is after the fuel filter. There's nothing to filter it out. It's all going to go straight to the injectors and clog them up if we're not careful. So once we do drill this out, this is broken. I cut this off for some reason. There was a reason for it. I forget what it was. But once you do drill this out, you have to be very diligent and make sure that there is no debris that's going to go to the engine and into the injectors and screw them up. So it takes a little to do things on the cheap. It takes time, a little bit of time and effort, forethought, and a bit of creativity, but in the end it all ends up working out just fine.
So now that we've gone through why I had to do this, it's finally got to the point of me disconnecting this from the fuel filter. So what you want to be doing is using a flathead screwdriver. Sure, you could just grab something and yank it, but like I said, with running the engine and letting it stall, the whole point of that is to reduce fuel pressure in the line so that when you pull it off, it doesn't spray anywhere. I've taken the fuel line, disconnected the fuel line from the fuel filter maybe 4 times, and it seems like half the time it sprays, half the time it just dribbles and nothing happens. So you never really know what's going to happen. So having the control of being able to make very small adjustments as you pry it off is really what's needed here. So first of all, the tab that I showed you is on the top of the fitting. So you have to reach over. This I find usually works the best. You reach over the top and you kind of pinch it with your thumb, and this go like that. Once you press that tab, it'll come loose, and it'll want to slide back, and then you just go and turn and pry it back. If it starts to spray, then you can just stop and let it spray until it starts to drip. If it does happen a second time, you've gotten all the pressure out of it and it'll just drip out. Make sure you have something underneath to catch it. Alright, so we're back here in the engine bay. So I just gave you some perspective where everything is. Coming in here, fuel lines, that's the sending to the engine, that's the return line. The blue is the return line, if you saw that from the bottom. So what I'm going to show you here is these tabs here on this cap. Right there. There's a little thing there. So this cap holds on through there, that corner, and this other corner here. On this side, you can see it's kind of slid over because there's nothing to keep it tight in place anymore, because I broke the other side. So just be careful with that. Unfortunately, I didn't really work out a very good technique for this, for not breaking it, so I can't really advise you very well, but at least you know what to look for. Maybe you'll have better success than me. Again, here are the tabs that I was telling you about. See how it's black? So you push that in. That's exactly what you're looking for. This is the stock factory fitting, and so that's what you're gonna be looking for in the top underneath the car. But in part 1, I reused the fitting that pokes out here. So you attach the new line to the end of this fitting. The original line is still there. Then you pull it through. Somebody feeds it from the top so it doesn't snag on anything inside, and it goes down into this whole thing straight and true. Once you get the new line kind of on the original fitting, you don't want it popping off. So having somebody in the engine bay helping you is pretty much a must, because if you're doing this on your own and it snags on something, because the new line does come in a roll after all, and it's not going to want to unwind very easily the way you want it, probably. It might pop off the end, and that just really sucks. And now will you be able to get the original one back up through here? I don't know. Maybe. Probably not, because it might be kind of messy. It'll be running into all the other lines and stuff. So yeah, 2-person job. It'll take you literally 30 seconds. But yeah, so reusing this fitting, just make a slit up the side of the original line so you can peel the line back and off the fitting. Just only make that cut as deep as it needs to be. Don't go any further, so you don't damage the fitting, so you don't make a gouge in the fitting and create issues with leaking when you go to reuse it. Fit it to the end of the old fitting, pull it through, right? That's what that little bump is still from. Once you pull it through, like I showed you in part 1, the very next step, without doing anything else, is taking that old fitting off, like I just showed you, and putting it on the new line. Don't do anything else. Definitely do not cut this line to what you think is the length you need, because you don't know if you're going to have enough in reality. This one's just vinyl. There's no like black outer coating and white inner coating as the factory one is. So this one, it almost seems like you have to basically get it close to melting point. It doesn't have like this working soft temperature that it's meant to be worked with. It's like you have to basically get it close to melting to get it as soft as you need it to fit over the new line, new fitting. So this is why you're going to do lots of trial and error with this. I had to try it, cut off about an inch or so after I ruined it, try it again, cut off about an inch and retry that. I had to cut it off 7 times. And after that 7 times, it still had this much left, which is at least like 1.5 feet, almost 2 feet. So you want that luxury of having that extra line. So the reason why I am here in front of this blowtorch is because at the time I did not have this, which I found for $20 finally. I didn't have the money to spend even $30 or $40 on the heat gun. So, but I already had this, so I thought I will use that. In fact, I was actually going to use a little lighter, because I thought it's hot enough, fire's hot enough, and since it's just a little flame, I can control it easily. The heat won't be too much, no big deal. Problem. Because you're putting this new fitting on that's supposed to be in the engine bay, inside there, you have to do it wherever the car is. If it's not inside a garage, then you have to do it outside. And anybody who's tried to light anything with a lighter outside knows it just gets blown out super easily. So that was completely impractical. It never worked at all, not even close. So, stable flame. This gives you a stable flame. Obviously, you want to turn this down to like just an inch long, as low as you can get it, basically. But if a little breeze came along, no big deal. It was fine. But there's a technique to this. And the thing you want to remember is, you're basically cooking a steak. This is going to make sense to you in a second. If you just go straight at it with this is why I had a bunch of trial and error with this. Yeah, you get it hot, but you get mostly the outside hot. And the very core of the line doesn't get really hot, so you end up like melting the outside and getting it bubbly, but then it doesn't really get soft and malleable enough to actually expand and let the fitting go into it. So hairdryer on high, on the end, spend at least 30 seconds going all the way around, evenly heating the tip. Let's go all the way around. Then you come to this. Small flame, already ready to go. Make sure your flame's running when you're working with the hairdryer. And then you heat up the top half. Let's say the fitting comes down here. You heat up this top half more than the bottom half. That way, this pointer might work, be applicable even with if you're using the heat gun. Haven't actually tried it yet, but it might be useful for that too. Heat up the top half more than the bottom half. That way this can expand more and go on super easy like you'd always want it to. Bottom half you'll have to sacrifice some of that convenience and expanding for the sake of structural rigidity. If it gets too soft, the further in the fitting goes, the more friction there is, and the harder you have to push to get it the rest of the way, and then this bottom part here usually just ends up collapsing and just folding the same way a straw would just fold in on itself, right? But unlike a straw that just pops back, this doesn't pop back because it's of course been heated and so on, and it'll just stay where it is. So then you have to cut it and try again. So that's why do not cut this until you get this fitting on. One thing that will help with that, so that you don't have to push so hard and try so many times, is white lithium grease. If you guys know what that is, white lithium grease comes in a little tube. Spread it liberally on the outside of the fitting. Don't be like super thick, but enough so where you have like this white, even coating of white around it. And then when you do this and you have it ready to go on the side, fitting there, this thing running, then you have this thing going with the starting to heat that up with the hair dryer. That way you can just go hair dryer, boom, torch, get it up the rest of the way. Just the points of maybe bubbling a little bit, but don't go past that. Preferably don't have it bubble, because that means you pretty much melted it and it's burning at this point. And then you go straight over, grab the fitting, pick it up, and put it in before it starts to cool. Okay, so I'm pretty sure you guys are pretty tired of this shot by now. We've been under here for a long time. So one last thing. So now that we're actually we're ready to actually get this thing bent and hooked up to the fitting, this one here. So what you want to do is push this back inside the car as far as possible, and then estimate how much you'll need, and then add at least an inch, probably 2 inches, just to be safe. I've had it most times, pretty much 90% of the time, I add a little bit more just to be safe, and it ends up being the perfect amount. And if I had any less, I would be kind of screwed or struggling. So add that extra. It's so much easier to lop off more if you need to. So to make this bend, you only need a hair dryer on high. You don't need a whole lot of heat to get this soft enough to bend like this. It's not bad. I get it as even as possible. Kind of limited with space down here, I know, but be pretty diligent, get as even as possible all the way around. And of course, before you do this bend, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, get this fitting on. Again, this one doesn't take a lot. This is actually, because it's one size smaller than it should be, it's actually much easier to get on than these from the factory. These from the factory are they're much bigger in diameter, outside diameter. So put a little bit of grease on here on the end of this fitting. Again, if you don't have a heat gun, then hairdryer on high will be just enough, and you can just push it right on. If you have a heat gun, make sure it's on low. You won't need much heat on there. Also, same thing for this bend. Make sure the heat gun's on low for this. Yeah, and just one thing to keep in mind, one thing I wasn't very specific about, which was when you're drilling out this fitting, boring it out to make it the same as the stock one. You're only doing this part, this lower part. Inside here, you don't need to do anything. There's seals in there and stuff anyway, so you have no business putting anything in there. But it's actually big enough, so it's not an issue at all. It's only this part here that's a bit too small. on the inside. So yeah, so only that one you're boring out. Give yourself a little bit extra slack. When you do fit, so you get that on, when you do make the bend, make sure this thing points so the fitting ends, and then from this point for another 1/2 inch you want this line to be going straight down before it starts making a bend, and that way there's no kinking. Alright, so in conclusion guys, just a couple more pointers I wanted to show you. The first one being this barb right here on this new fitting that I cut up so unceremoniously. If you notice there, a small barb on the front and then a bigger one on the back. If you happen to get the same one, the one thing I noticed is that as long as you fit it over that first barb, it'll seal just fine. You could, if you want to be extra diligent, go over that second barb there to make sure it seals nice and tight, but I found that there are no issues if you just go over that first one. Alright, and if there is, I guess you could just put like a little small clamp around just there, make sure it stays tight. If you happen to get a leak, if you're running higher fuel pressure, if you have a tuned car or not. So that's the first one. Second one is this. With your fitting and you're cleaning it out, I recommend using a flashlight. Look through the top and vice versa, just to make sure that you have everything. Make sure you have to use a flashlight. That's the only sure way to know whether you have any debris left in there or not. So flashlight, make sure you do that. And last but not least, on the subject of keeping things clean, your fuel line. So when you're working on the car, you got the fuel line fed through the bottom and stuff, and you're working in the engine bay or whatever, whichever end is open and is unprotected and might be rolling in the dirt, make sure that you have something maybe covering the tip, kind of like so, something that fits tight. If you don't happen to find conveniently enough something like a little piece of rubber or something, get a small screw that you just stick in the end there, thread it in, or tape, whatever, just as long as it'll stay firmly on, so that when you're working with it and it gets kind of thrown around in the dust or in your driveway, it'll stay on and keep dust from getting in there. Fuel line is a lot harder to clean out, and it's better just not to go there in the first place, right? Why take the risk? So yeah, hopefully this whole thing has been very useful to you guys. It's been a long process. It's my first big video. All the other ones have been one takes and so on, but I really wanted to do this justice, and so that you guys can actually get something useful out of this. I know how much of a pain it is when people just take certain steps for granted, and it's just like, seriously, that's all you're gonna leave me with? Right, so what's the point? I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you next time. So anyway, in my best Ben Stein voice,